When you think of one of the biggest problem areas for the New York Football Giants in the past 10 years, one of the first places you will always go to is the New York Giants offensive line, a position that has been a very big weakness for this team. Very limited blocking, injuries, missed draft picks, missed signings. The offensive line has been an absolute disaster, and in a way, it disrupted and hurt the rest of Eli Manning's career, as well as it's helped stop the development, in a way, of the current quarterback of the New York Giants, Daniel Jones, and hasn't been able to open up enough holes to allow running back Saquon Barkley to operate completely. But right now, the offensive line, for the first time in a while, might have a little bit more promise, but is still filled with a lot of question marks that hopefully we'll get some answers from, not only in training camp and preseason, but especially as the 2022 season begins. What up, everybody? This is NYG Jeffy T, 3285, and today on Part 5 of the New York Giants Roundabout, we're going to start talking about the meat and potatoes of the New York Giants team, starting with today, the New York Giants offensive line. Now, the offensive line has been the one thing that has plagued the New York Giants offense and the team in general for many years. Whether it's been missed draft picks for the past 5 to 10 years, whether it's been free agent signings that have come in and they've flopped, whether it's been players getting hurt, players not being able to transition to new positions, players just not being able to get to the production of level of they have been before. It's been an absolute mess with the offensive line, and it's helped stunt the growth of Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, as well as hurt the rest of the career of Eli Manning over the years. But this year, I'm just going to evaluate the offensive line on the current players on the team heading into training camp, as well as preseason, where they're projected to be in terms of if they're going to be starting, if they're going to make the roster, and the percentage chances of making the roster. Now, when you think of the New York Giants offensive line in 2022, the first name that always is going to pop into the head of every Giants fan is going to be Andrew Thomas, the left tackle drafted out of Georgia going into his third season. Andrew Thomas made some strides coming into second season last year, where he was able to earn at least an over 80 grade from PFF in his blocking and his pass blocking and run blocking. But the one thing that has plagued Andrew Thomas from the beginning of his career has been injuries, especially to his ankle and his feet. Last year, Andrew Thomas dealt with numerous injuries and was forced to miss at least 4 to 6 games last year during the season, in which the New York Giants offensive line was an out-and-out disaster, and without their franchise left tackle, it just made things a lot more worse. Andrew Thomas had to undergo another ankle surgery this past offseason, but he looks ready to go, as he should be fully recovered and ready to start training camp in preseason, looking to build on a very strong 2021 NFL season and looking to potentially become one of the best young left tackles in the NFL. Andrew Thomas has all the traits to become one of the best offensive linemen, not only left tackles, but offensive linemen in the NFL coming into this 2022 NFL season. All Andrew Thomas has to do is remain healthy and continue his growth under new offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. Now, next to Andrew Thomas at left guard is going to be a few players that are going to be vying for that spot. As I can see, the left guard position is going to be one of the most open competitions coming into the season, as you got veteran offensive lineman Max Garcia coming over for the Arizona Cardinals, who also played some center. You got young offensive lineman Josh Azudu, who was drafted out of the 3rd round from North Carolina, got a lot of upside and promise. You got returning third-year man Shane Lemieux, that's from Oregon, coming off a serious patella tendon injury. You got Ben Bredesen, who was traded from the Baltimore Ravens last year, who's going to be online for competition. You got Jamil Douglas, who has been bouncing around the league, including a stop with the Tennessee Titans last year. You got a lot of players. You got Josh Rivas, the undrafted free agent from Kansas State. You got Mark McKeithen, also another offensive guard from North Carolina, 6'7", 265 pounds, big boy. So you got 365. You got a lot of guys on this New York Giants offensive line that are going to be competing for the left guard position. Right now, I'd probably give the edge to Shane Lemieux, because he's got the most chemistry with Andrew Thomas, as well as seems to be getting the first team snaps, and he probably is the most ready for the system going in. But I would not count out a guy like Josh Azudu, who seems to be fitting this offensive line scheme perfectly on what Bobby Johnson, Brian Dable, and Mike Kafka look for in their offensive linemen for this 2022 NFL season. So I could definitely see Ezeudu leapfrogging Lemieux, especially since Lemieux has been a very big liability in terms of pass protection coming in his first couple of years. And he's coming off a serious injury, so you don't know where Shane Lemieux is exactly in this upcoming training camp, preseason, and even coming to the season. So I think that left guard position is open completely for competition. Max Garcia also has been a former Pro Bowler, could easily sneak into that spot for the starting spot, but he's also been lately been playing with the third string team, so he might not even make the roster. In terms of center position, the New York Giants brought over veteran center/guard John Feliciano, who Bobby Johnson seems to be a very big favorite of. He's got that dirtbag mentality, very tough-nosed, hard-nosed leader for that center position, although he struggled at times in terms of his pass blocking and his run blocking, or pass protection and his run blocking, so he might have the strong mentality, a big veteran presence, but who knows if Feliciano is going to be able to continue to be a solid player for that center position. I think if anything, he's going to be a solid stopgap guy for that center spot. And also you got to factor in the other guy, Nick Gates, who unfortunately suffered a serious leg injury that he's had multiple surgeries on, and we don't even know where Nick Gates is going to be. I could easily see him being placed on the PUP list, the fourth-year center/guard/offensive tackle for the New York Giants coming out of Ohio State. So Nick Gates, he's going to be just competing for that pretty much for a roster spot, might be placed on the PUP list. See if he might not even be able to play this year coming off a serious leg injury. So I hope Nick Gates is going to be able to recover 100%, but he's just a complete wild card right now for this team. And then, in terms of the right guard spot, you bring in veteran offensive lineman for the Indianapolis Colts, Mark Lewinsky, who was part of that great Colts offensive line for a long time. Not one of the best offensive linemen, but he's going to give you steady veteran play. He's a solid run blocker, a little bit of liability in the pass protection department, but he's not bad. He's solid to average, maybe a little bit above average, maybe a little, like right around the average point in terms of his pass blocking, so he's got to improve on that. But you bring in a solid veteran at that right guard spot that's going to help out where I'm going to go next in terms of the right tackle spot, and that's Evan Neal, the seventh pick overall in the 2022 NFL Draft from Alabama. Lots of upside. A big guy at 6'7", over 320 pounds. Projected to be a mauler. One of the best prospects, if not the best prospect, in terms of the offensive lineman coming out of this past draft. You're expecting him to come in and become that steady presence on the right tackle position that the New York Giants have been lacking for many years, as that right tackle position has been a big-time hole since the days of Kareem McKenzie when he was signed from the New York Jets years ago. So you're expecting Evan Neal to come in. He's going to have some growing pains, but you want him to eventually develop and be that stalwart tackle at the right tackle position, opposite of Andrew Thomas. So the New York Giants are hoping and going into this season, hoping that Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal will be able to solve those tackle positions for the next 5 to 10 years for the New York Giants. And that Mark Lewinsky will be a steady presence at the right guard position. So you're hoping at least the New York Giants will have 3 positions on their offensive line that should be locks for them going into the 2022 season. Even 4 potentially if John Feliciano could just have a very solid, very good preseason and training camp, and he should be able to lock down that center position. The left guard position, like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a wide open competition right now. So I think in terms of 100% locks, I expect Evan Neal, Andrew Thomas, Mark Lewinsky to be 100% locks. I even expect a guy like Josh Ezeudu, who they drafted in the 3rd round this past draft, to be 100% lock, and he could even vie and potentially win that left guard spot. Shane Lemieux, I think, will be about an 85 to 90% lock to make the roster. I expect him to be here on the team, whether he's a reserve player or if he outright wins that left guard position starting the season, because he does have chemistry with Andrew Thomas. He has worked with Andrew Thomas, and Andrew Thomas had some of his best games when Shane Lemieux was next to him on that left guard position. So, and John Feliciano, unless he just completely falls off or he gets hurt, I expect him to be part of the New York Giants roster, so I'm going to put him in about an 85-90% chance to make the roster going forward. Another guy, I think Mark McKeithen, the 5th round pick The fifth round pick out of North Carolina. Yeah, he's more of a developmental offensive lineman, but I expect him to be with the New York Giants going forward. So I put him at like about an 85 to 90% chance to make the roster. He's specifically here to develop right now under the New York Giants. Bobby Johnson, and I think if anything, he's going to be a reserve guy going forward. Now, in terms of like the reserve guys, so my offensive lineman who I think is going to start, it's going to be Andrew Thomas at left tackle. I think Josh Azudu, Shane Lemieux, it's going to be a battle between those two guys for the left guard spot. I think Shane Lemieux will win the position early, but I think Josh Azudu during the training camp will be able to, or during the season could be able to beat him out eventually and take that left guard spot because I think he's the left guard of the future. Center position, I think it's going to be John Feliciano, though I could easily see a guy like Ben Bredesen, who they've been playing a lot at center during training camp, during mini camp and OTAs, trying him out there, as well as if Nick Gates can ever recover. Maybe they're going to try to see what he can do. As well as Shane Lemieux has even played some center before, so if he doesn't win that left guard position, I could easily see him trying up for center. Mark Lewinsky is going to be the right guard. They signed him to that contract, so I expect him to be the right guard. And Evan Neal, you don't draft a guy at number 7 overall in this past draft to not be the starting player at left tackle. So a right tackle. He's going to be the starter at right tackle. Now in terms of the reserves, you have quite the group of players that they brought in. Whether it's McKeithen, like I mentioned earlier, and Azudu from North Carolina, Josh Rivas, the undrafted free agent from Kansas State. You got Jameel Douglas. You got Corey Cunningham, who they brought back last year. You have Matt Parrott, third year coming out of Connecticut, although he's coming off a torn ACL. You have Nick Gates, like I mentioned earlier, fourth-year player, can play all the positions on the offensive line. You have Matt Gano, who they signed from the Atlanta Falcons last year, but pretty much missed off last year with injuries. So they have somewhat depth, but a lot of guys that are unproven. Max Garcia, who I mentioned before, who they signed, Ben Bredesen. There's a lot of guys right now on this offensive line that are going to be battling it out for those reserve roles. So I think the Giants are going to carry at least 8 to 9 offensive linemen. So essentially you're thinking 3 to 4 offensive linemen are going to be battling it out. And the New York Giants have about 12 or 13 offensive linemen, maybe 14, that are battling it out for at least 3 or 4 spots on that offensive line in terms of reserve spots. Who I think are going to get it, I think Matt Gano is, as long as he doesn't fall off completely, I think he's going to be the first guy they're going to be looking at in terms of that swing tackle position, though I think Corey Cunningham could have the leg up because Gano was working with the second and third teams in OTAs and minicamp, and Corey Cunningham was being used as one of those backup, was being used as a backup left tackle as well as Josh Azudu instead of Matt Gano, so that might not be the greatest signs for Gano going into training camp preseason, but he could always make up for it. Ben Bredesen was mainly used as a second team or third team center and left guard, so they obviously see him maybe as a potential center going down the road. Nick Gates and Matt Parrott pretty much didn't do any type of practicing or anything. I could easily see both those guys, if they make the roster, they're going to be placed on the PUP list, so I think they're going to miss the first 6 games of the year. In terms of Jameel Douglas, I think he's just easily going to be a guy that's going to be just fighting for one of those guard spots. I mean, he's a decent backup player. Josh Rivas, I could easily see just being a guy they're going to stash on the practice squad. In terms of percentages, I'm going to go by this. I think Matt Gano right now has about a 45 to 50% chance to make the roster because of, what I've seen so far in his minicamp and OTAs. It's just a very troubling sign that he has had trouble even snatching that swing tackle role that's gone to Corey Cunningham and even Josh Azudu instead of Gano, so that might not be a good sign for his outlook, but we'll have to see. In terms of Josh Rivas, I pretty much put him at about a 5 to 10% chance to make the roster. I think there's just too much competition in front of him. I think he's strictly a practice squad stash guy to develop him. I forgot about the player they signed out of Nigeria, Roy Mbatige, who I think specifically they brought him in, who Osi Umenyiora, the former New York Giants defensive end great. I think he's specifically brought in to be a developmental prospect. If the Giants want to try to invest more in him, they're going to stash him on that practice squad and try to develop this guy over the next couple of years, see what he can do with him. Jameel Douglas, I think, could win one of those roster spots, but I think he's competing with a guy like Max Garcia, Ben Bredesen, Nick Gates, Shane Lemieux, those guys for a backup spot. I think I put Jamil Douglas's chances to make the roster about 35 to 45%, around that range. I think he's got a little bit of an uphill battle, but I think he could outright win one of those reserve spots at the guard position. Ben Bredesen, I'd probably put around 50%, 55% to make the roster. Bredesen, and if he could maybe lock down a reserve spot at like the guard, or maybe even a potential guy that can be the future offensive center position for the Giants, if they really believe in his talent that he could transition and become a long-term center. Nick Gates, Nick Gates is a tricky one because I just don't know where he is in terms of his recovery. There's been he's been doing everything he can to try to play this year, but I just don't know, with all the surgeries he had on his leg, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it back. I could easily see him being a guy that's going to miss the entire season, and maybe they reevaluate going forward, or they could just outright cut him, or maybe just go with an injury settlement. So I just don't know where Nick Gates is going to be. I could easily see him being cut, so maybe I just put him at like it can be anywhere from like 25% to maybe even like 55%, because the New York Giants do love him in terms of what he brings to this team, in terms of leadership and his play. But his injury is so serious, I just don't know. In terms of Shane Lemieux, I think he will make the roster, like I mentioned earlier. I think he'll be like a 65 to 70% chance to make the roster. Corey Cunningham, it's going to be between him and Matt Gano. I could see him at about 45% chance to make the roster. I think if Gano can be able to bounce back, I could see him make it. Garcia, I don't love his chances right now. I think I put him in about the 35% chance to make the roster. It's going to be very tricky for him, but he's going to have to really step it up, because the fact he was playing with the third string team for the OTAs and minicamp, so he's going to have to really step it up going forward. The New York Giants, it's going to be a fun competition overall. Just to wrap this up, it's going to be a fun competition watching these offensive linemen battle it out, because besides the tight end position in the video I talked about yesterday, the offensive line is going to be fun, just seeing who's going to win out that left guard position that's wide open, maybe even the center position if Feliciano struggles, and the reserve spots, which are about three or four reserve spots that are open right now for the New York Giants offensive linemen to win. So it's going to be fun to see this battle. The offensive line has been a black hole for this team for many years, and we're hoping that some of the players that have been drafted and come in on 1-year prove-it deals can show out and prove to the New York Giants team that the offensive line is finally progressing in the right direction under offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. So thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked the video, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already to NYG Jeffy T 3285 for more breaking news, updates, and chatter surrounding the New York Giants. Turn on the bell for notifications on the next video or short surrounding the New York Giants, Brooklyn Nets, New York Mets, WWE Wrestling, as well as my food for thought. And leave a comment below on what your projections are for this offensive line in general. Who you think are going to make the roster, like how many offensive linemen you think are going to make the roster, and what players you think are going to surprise in training camp and preseason that are maybe going to sneak up and grab one of those roster spots for a reserve role going forward. So thank you very much. I hope everybody enjoys their Hump Day Wednesday. Take it easy, and let's go New York Football Giants.